The first proof was not found by an archaeologist. It was carried out of a sacred cave by a monk who had gone inside to pray. In his hands was half of a human lower jaw, thick with mineral crust, missing its chin, and still holding two enormous molars. The bone looked ancient, but it matched no familiar chapter of human history. It was too robust for us, too late for the simplest Homo erectus story, too far east for the Neanderthal map, and discovered more than 3,000 meters above sea level in a place many researchers once believed humans occupied only much later. For decades, the jaw sat without a name. Then scientists stopped asking it for DNA. They asked for its proteins. The answer revealed that another kind of human had reached the Tibetan Plateau at least 160,000 years ago, survived air containing far less oxygen than at sea level, processed animals inside the cave, returned across tens of thousands of years, and left part of its genetic solution inside people living on the plateau today. The discovery did not merely add one fossil to the family tree, it broke the timeline. Baixia Karst Cave opens in a pale limestone cliff near Xiahe in China's Gansu province on the northeastern edge of the Tibetan Plateau. The entrance sits approximately 3,280 meters above sea level. At that elevation, every breath contains the same proportion of oxygen as lower air, but reduced atmospheric pressure means fewer oxygen molecules enter the lungs with each breath. For an unadapted person, physical work becomes harder, sleep can be disturbed, headaches begin, and prolonged exposure can strain the heart, lungs, and blood vessels. This is not a landscape that forgives biological weakness. The surrounding basin is cold, windy, and seasonally harsh. Winters limit vegetation. Weather changes quickly. Even modern visitors can feel the altitude before they understand it. Yet the cave has also been a Tibetan Buddhist sanctuary for generations, filled with prayer, movement, and local memory long before scientists recognized its deeper history. The jaw was reportedly discovered there in 1980 by a monk. He passed it to the 6th Gongthang living Buddha, who then gave it to Lanzhou University. The exact details of the discovery were imperfectly documented, and the specimen lacked a controlled archaeological layer. That missing context created the first major problem. A fossil without a secure layer is separated from the tools, animals, sediments, and events around it. Scientists could examine the bone. They could not immediately reconstruct its world. Researchers eventually connected the mandible to Baixia Karst Cave through local accounts and geological investigation, but obtaining permission to excavate an active religious site required patience and cooperation. Systematic fieldwork began decades after the jaw left the cave. During those decades, the fossil resisted classification. The mandible's body was thick and low. It lacked the projecting chin characteristic of Homo sapiens. Its teeth were exceptionally large. One lower molar had 3 roots, a form uncommon in many present-day populations, but more frequent in parts of East Asia and among populations whose ancestry ultimately connects to ancient Asian groups. That feature alone could not identify the fossil. Dental traits can survive across populations, reappear through shared ancestry, or evolve in related lineages. Morphology suggested connections, but produced several possible answers. The jaw could represent an unusual East Asian archaic human, a late Homo erectus population, a relative of Neanderthals, or a lineage science had barely seen. The obvious solution was ancient DNA. But DNA had not survived well enough. Genetic material breaks into shorter fragments after death. Heat, moisture, microbes, chemistry, and time destroy it. Cold caves can preserve ancient molecules, but preservation is never guaranteed. Repeated attempts did not produce a usable genome from the Xiahe mandible. A decade earlier, The absence of DNA might have ended the investigation. Instead, researchers turned to ancient proteins. Proteins generally contain less evolutionary information than a full genome, but some survive longer. Collagen forms much of bone and tooth dentine. Its amino acid sequence is partly determined by DNA, and small differences can help place a fossil among related lineages. Scientists extracted proteins from dentine in one of the Jiahe teeth. They confirmed patterns of molecular degradation expected in genuinely ancient material rather than modern contamination. The recovered sequence placed the individual close to Denisovans. At that moment, the meaning of the jaw changed. Until 2019, securely identified Denisovan fossils had come almost entirely from Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. The lineage had been discovered in 2010 through DNA from a small finger bone fragment. Its genome showed that it was neither modern human nor Neanderthal, although Denisovans and Neanderthals shared a closer common ancestry with each other than either did with us. Scientists had discovered a population before they knew its face. A few teeth and small bone fragments followed. The genetic record was extraordinary, but the anatomy remained nearly invisible. Denisovans became a ghost population described through sequences and the DNA they left in living humans. The Jiahe jaw was the first Denisovan fossil recognized outside Denisova Cave. The distance between the sites was enormous. Denisova Cave lies at roughly 700 meters above sea level. Baishia Karst Cave stands at 3,280 meters. The mandible's carbonate crust was dated through uranium series methods to at least 160,000 years ago. Because the crust formed after the jaw was deposited, the date established a minimum age. The bone could be older. That single result moved Denisovans from a Siberian cave into the high Tibetan Plateau. It also challenged a powerful assumption that the plateau's interior required the technologies, networks, and physiological adaptations of much later Homo sapiens. Another human lineage had reached high altitude first, but one jaw could not prove a permanent population. A person could have traveled briefly into the basin. A carnivore could have transported part of a body. Water or geological processes could have moved material. The mandible proved presence, but not repeated occupation. The cave floor had to answer the next question. When archaeologists began controlled excavation, they recovered sediments, stone tools, charcoal, and thousands of fragmented animal bones. Many fragments were too small for identification by shape. Researchers therefore used zooarchaeology by mass spectrometry, or ZooMS, a method that reads diagnostic collagen fingerprints and assigns bone fragments to animal groups. The cave contained blue sheep, wild yak, equids, woolly rhinoceros, spotted hyena, marmots, hares, birds, carnivores, and other animals adapted to the plateau. Many bones carried human modifications. Cut marks showed meat removal. Impact damage revealed marrow extraction. Some fragments had been shaped or used. Burning indicated fire and processing. The pattern was not a random accumulation of animals dying inside a cave. Hominins had brought resources in, broken carcasses down, and repeatedly used what the environment provided. Blue sheep dominated much of the assemblage. These animals still occupy the region today. Denisovans or other cave occupants used meat, marrow, and hides from large and small species. They did not survive through one narrow prey strategy. They exploited the plateau broadly. The stone tools were comparatively simple cores and flakes. That simplicity matters because human history stories often equate survival in difficult environments with visually sophisticated technology. The Baishia evidence suggests that complex adaptation does not always leave elaborate blades, ornaments, or architecture. A reliable flake produced from local stone can cut meat and hide effectively. knowledge of seasons, animals, fire, shelter, and movement may matter more than an impressive tool catalog. The cave's most important new fossil was almost invisible among the fragments. A rib piece, catalogued as Siahi II, could not be identified as human by ordinary inspection. Protein analysis linked it to Denisovans. Its layer was dated to approximately 48,000 to 32,000 years ago. The rib extended Denisovan presence on the plateau far beyond the minimum age of the jaw. Between the two fossils lay more than 100,000 years. That did not prove an unbroken occupation by one local family line. Populations could leave and return. Different Denisovan groups could move through the region. Yet the evidence now included an ancient mandible, a much younger rib, archaeological activity, and Denisovan genetic material recovered directly from sediment. The cave was no longer a place one Denisovan happened to reach. It was part of a long human landscape. Sedimentary DNA changed archaeology because a body is not required for genetic detection. Humans and animals shed cells, blood, hair, urine, feces, and decomposed tissue into the places they occupy. In cold, stable sediments, fragments of mitochondrial DNA can bind to minerals and survive. Scientists sampled layers from Baishia Karst Cave and recovered Denisovan mitochondrial DNA from several deposits. The reported signals connected Denisovans to occupation phases around 100,000 and 60,000 years ago, with younger evidence potentially extending later. The method is powerful but sensitive. DNA can move through sediments under some conditions. Water can carry molecules. Layers can be disturbed by animals, people, or geological processes. Dating sediments and linking a molecule to one exact moment requires careful stratigraphy and testing. A technical critique questioned whether movement of sediment and DNA had been excluded strongly enough in the early Baishia study. The research team defended its interpretation. Later fossil and archaeological evidence independently strengthened the case for long Denisovan use of the cave, even though scientific discussion over individual layers remains legitimate. Good science does not erase disagreement. It makes the conclusions survive more than one kind of evidence. At Baishia, protein, sediment DNA, fossil dating, animal processing, stone tools, and stratigraphy now converge on the same broad answer. Denisovans lived on the Tibetan Plateau across a very long period. The cave did not merely preserve them, it revealed how little the old map had known. For years, Denisovans were imagined from one Siberian location, even though their genetic legacy suggested a much larger Asian distribution. Present-day populations in Oceania and parts of Southeast Asia carry substantial Denisovan ancestry. Some Philippine indigenous groups, particularly the Ida Magbukon in one major study, carry the highest levels yet detected, exceeding those of Papuans and indigenous Australians under the methods used. A population confined to the Altai could not easily explain that pattern. Denisovans, or several genetically differentiated Denisovan-related populations, must have occupied wide areas of Asia and mixed with Homo sapiens more than once. The fossils are now beginning to catch up with the genomes. A molar from Tam Gu Hao II, or Cobra Cave in Laos, was identified as probably Denisovan through protein and morphological evidence, although uncertainty remains. Its location in tropical Southeast Asia expanded the possible ecological range from cold Siberia and high Tibet to warm forests. A robust mandible recovered from the Penghu Channel near Taiwan was assigned to a male Denisovan in a 2025 science study using ancient enamel proteins. Its large teeth and heavy jaw resembled part of the Siahi anatomy, offering another glimpse of Denisovan males in Eastern Asia. Then the Harbin skull changed the picture again. The nearly complete cranium had been recovered near Harbin in northeastern China and introduced to science as Homo longi, popularly called Dragon Man. Its age was estimated at more than 146,000 years. Researchers debated whether it represented a separate species, a sister lineage, close to Homo sapiens, or a member of the broader Denisovan population, known mostly from molecules. In 2025, researchers recovered ancient proteins from the skull and mitochondrial DNA from dental calculus. The molecular evidence placed the Harbin individual with Denisovans. For the first time, the ghost population had something close to a face. The skull was large and long, with massive brow ridges, a broad face, and a large brain case. But one skull cannot define the appearance of every Denisovan across Asia. The population may have contained deep regional diversity. The Siberian Denisovans, who mixed with one modern group, may not have looked identical to Plateau or Eastern Chinese populations. Even the name remains unsettled. Some researchers may continue using Homo longi for the Harbin-related group. Others connect Denisovan fossils with names such as Homo juluensis. Some prefer Denisovan as a population label without assigning a formal species. Taxonomy is not a vote on whether the people existed. It is an argument over how their diversity fits into the human family tree. The strongest connection between Baixia and living people lies not in a skull or jaw, but in one region of the modern genome. Tibetan populations possess a distinctive haplotype around EPAS1, a gene involved in the body's response to low oxygen. At high altitude, many lowland visitors respond by producing more red blood cells. This can improve oxygen transport temporarily, but excessive red cell production thickens the blood and increases cardiovascular strain. The Tibetan EPAS1 associated pattern helps support a different response, including relatively lower hemoglobin concentrations than an unadapted body might otherwise produce at similar altitude. In 2014, scientists compared the region in Tibetans, Han Chinese, and archaic genomes. The Tibetan haplotype was extraordinarily similar to Denisovan DNA and difficult to explain without ancient introgression. Homo sapiens had mixed with Denisovans or a Denisovan-related population. Their descendants carried the segment. Later, high-altitude life made it valuable. This is evolution using borrowed material. Modern humans did not need to wait for a new mutation to appear. Interbreeding introduced a variant already shaped within another human lineage. Natural selection then increased its frequency among people living where the variant improved survival or reproduction. The reference story says Denisovans solved high altitude and gave the answer directly to Tibetans. The real sequence is more careful. We do not possess the Shahi individual's nuclear genome, so scientists cannot prove that the specific Denisovans at Baixia carried the exact modern Tibetan EPAS1 haplotype. The source was Denisovan, or closely Denisovan-related, based on genomic comparison. The introgression likely occurred tens of thousands of years ago, while the strongest rise in frequency may have happened later as permanent high-altitude populations expanded. The gene did not single-handedly make the plateau habitable. Tibetan adaptation involves EPAS1, EGLN1, and many other biological and cultural factors: pregnancy, birth weight, blood flow, breathing, metabolism, housing, clothing, fire, diet, livestock, and social knowledge all influence survival. EPAS1 is one of the clearest adaptive introgression examples known. It is not the entire story of Tibet. The timing also contains a powerful mystery. At Nuya Devu in central Tibet, archaeologists found thousands of stone artifacts at approximately 4,600 meters above sea level, with major occupation layers dated roughly 40,000 to 30,000 years ago. The site demonstrates early hominin activity at extreme altitude. No human fossils or DNA were recovered there. The tools are generally attributed to Homo sapiens because of their technology and age, but the maker has not been identified directly. Denisovans were present elsewhere on the plateau during an overlapping broad time frame. Modern humans were spreading across Eurasia. The responsible conclusion is that the site records an early high-altitude population whose exact biological identity remains unproven. This uncertainty makes the plateau more interesting. It may have been a meeting zone. Denisovans could have occupied parts of it before modern humans arrived. Homo sapiens may later have entered, mixed with Denisovan-related groups, learned local landscapes, inherited useful DNA, or followed several separate routes into high country. Human expansion was rarely one population replacing another without contact. The genes inside living people prove that encounters occurred. What the bones cannot reveal is how those encounters felt. Did groups trade stone or animal products? Did they recognize one another as people? Did they exchange partners peacefully, capture individuals, or absorb small communities after conflict? Did modern humans learn routes, prey behavior, or shelter locations from Denisovans, or rediscover them independently? DNA records reproduction. It does not preserve consent, language, or memory. The title says archaeologists found something beneath a Chinese mountain that does not match human history. The mountain did not contain an impossible civilization or forbidden technology. It contained evidence that the old history was too narrow. That older history placed Homo sapiens at the center of every difficult adaptation. Other human groups appeared as evolutionary dead ends, primitive, geographically limited, and unable to match our flexibility. Baixia overturned that hierarchy. Denisovans occupied high altitude at least 160,000 years ago. They survived glacial and warmer periods. They processed a broad range of animals. They used the cave repeatedly. Their lineage persisted there or returned until tens of thousands of years ago. They did not need to become us in order to be adaptable. Their simple flakes did not make their knowledge simple. Their disappearance did not make their survival unsuccessful. A lineage can endure for hundreds of thousands of years and still leave almost no named history. This is the bias of archaeology. Stone, bone, climate, and preservation decide who appears visible. A population living in regions where DNA decays rapidly can seem absent even when its genetic descendants reveal a broad distribution. A cave with exceptional conditions can become the only witness for an entire branch. Baixia survived because cold sediment, limestone, mineral crust, religious stewardship, local decisions, and scientific methods aligned. The monks' action mattered. Had the jaw been ignored, destroyed, or ground into powder, the first physical Denisovan outside Siberia might have remained unknown for decades longer. Yet the discovery should not be told as though local religious practice were merely an obstacle. The cave remains sacred. Research occurred through negotiation with the communities and authorities connected to it. Scientific importance does not erase living meaning. The fossils belong to deep human history, but the place belongs to people now. The same respect should shape how Denisovan ancestry is discussed. Tibetans are not part Denisovan in a way that makes them less modern humans. All living people are Homo sapiens. Many populations carry small amounts of DNA inherited from archaic groups, including Neanderthals and Denisovans. Introgressed DNA is part of modern human history. It does not create surviving pure Denisovans. Aita Magbukon, Papuans, indigenous Australians, Tibetans, East Asians, and others carry different Denisovan-derived segments because ancient mixing happened in different places and perhaps with different Denisovan populations. The amount of total ancestry does not predict the importance of one particular variant. Populations in Oceania can carry more Denisovan ancestry overall while lacking the high-frequency Tibetan EPIS-1 haplotype. Evolution preserves what matters locally. A small inherited segment can become more important than thousands of neutral fragments. The future of Denisovan research now lies across Eastern and Southern Asia. Fossils previously labeled archaic Homo late Homo erectus, early Homo sapiens, Homo longi, or uncertain Middle Pleistocene hominins may preserve proteins or DNA capable of testing their relationships. Not every mysterious Chinese fossil will become Denisovan. Some may represent separate populations. Some may reveal mixtures. Some may force scientists to divide Denisovans into several deeply structured groups rather than one species-like unit. The Harbin result already warns against expecting one anatomy. The Penghu mandible strengthens a robust jawed pattern in males. The Laos molar suggests presence farther south. Baixia demonstrates altitude adaptation and long-term occupation. Denisova cave reveals interbreeding with Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Together, they describe a human population spread across environments no single stereotype can contain. The final mystery is their ending. The youngest securely dated Denisovan fossil currently identified is the Baixia rib from a layer approximately 48,000 to 32,000 years old. Denisovan DNA entered Homo sapiens at several times, and some mixing may have occurred late enough for populations to overlap extensively, but no site records the last Denisovan community. They may have declined through climate change, small population size, competition, disease, absorption into larger Homo sapiens groups, or a combination. Extinction may not have been one final death. As with other archaic humans, the population could have disappeared, partly by being incorporated into us. In that sense, their lineage ended and continued at once. Their distinctive population structure vanished. Some of their DNA survived. On the Tibetan Plateau, one inherited region became a biological advantage of extraordinary importance. The Denisovans who carried ancestral versions could not know that people tens of thousands of years later would depend on that legacy. Evolution has no plan. One encounter leaves a segment, generations pass. An environment turns that segment into survival. This is the deepest reversal beneath the mountain. Modern humans did not conquer every landscape with modern genes alone. We sometimes succeeded because another human population had already carried useful variation. The jaw from Baixia did not belong to our direct, pure line marching toward civilization. Human evolution has no pure line. It is a braided history of separation, reunion, replacement, and inheritance. The plateau was not empty before us. The solution was not entirely ours. The people who first mastered that world did not leave writing, monuments, or a species name everyone accepts. They left a jaw. They left a rib. They left blood on stone, DNA in dirt, cut marks on animal bones, and one of the most important altitude-related haplotypes in living humanity. That evidence matches human history only after human history becomes large enough to include more than us. Return to the pale cliff and the prayer flags moving outside its entrance. Beneath the floor are layers representing climates that came and went, animals that no longer live there, fires that died tens of thousands of years ago, and human presences known only from molecules. The cave has surrendered 2 Denisovan bones. It has almost certainly held more. The jaw waited nearly 40 years for science to learn how to read protein. The sediment waited for methods capable of finding DNA without a body. The rib waited among thousands of fragments until collagen gave it a name. Nothing about the discovery was impossible. The impossible part was the history that assumed nobody could have been there. Archaeologists did not find a civilization that contradicted evolution. They found evolution contradicting the civilization story. Another kind of human reached the roof of the world first, endured it for an immense span of time, and left part of the answer in us. They are gone as recognizable people. But every easy breath carried by their genetic legacy is evidence that disappearance is not always the end. There is one final caution. The word Denisovan sounds more precise than the evidence currently allows. It began as a genetic label for individuals related to the genome from Denisova Cave. As fossils across Asia joined that cluster through proteins, mitochondrial DNA, or morphology, researchers may be grouping populations separated by vast distances and hundreds of thousands of years. A person in Siberia, one on the Tibetan Plateau, one in northeastern China, and one near Taiwan may not have belonged to one culturally or biologically uniform people. Their shared lineage could contain regional branches as different from one another as ancient human populations within Africa or Eurasia. This matters when reconstructing behavior. The animal processing evidence at Baishia belongs to the cave's occupants and its archaeological sequence. It should not automatically describe every Denisovan elsewhere. A tropical Denisovan-related population in Southeast Asia would have faced different prey, plants, diseases, and technologies. The same principle applies to appearance. The Harbin skull gives one powerful anatomical reference, not a universal Denisovan face. Sexual dimorphism, age, region, and population history could produce major differences. The Xiahe and Penghu jaws suggest robust males, but females in other groups may have varied. Science is therefore moving from discovering the Denisovans to discovering their diversity. That transition will make the story less simple and more human. It may also change the plateau timeline again. Older deposits could preserve further evidence. Better dating may refine the age of occupation layers. Nuclear DNA from a Baishia fossil could connect the local population directly to EPAS 1 or reveal that the introgressing group came from somewhere else. Until then, the strongest conclusion remains extraordinary, without exaggeration. Denisovans occupied the Tibetan Plateau far earlier than once expected, returned or persisted over a vast span of time, used diverse animal resources, and contributed ancestry that later helped Homo sapiens adapt to altitude. The mountain did not hide an error in evolution. It hid a missing population from our own family history. The discovery also changes how we think about intelligence. Archaeology often rewards objects that look complex to modern eyes, symmetrical blades, ornaments, buildings, or art. Baishia offers a different measure. Surviving for generations at altitude requires memory of animal routes, knowledge of weather, access to fuel, protection from cold, and cooperation among people who cannot afford repeated mistakes. None of that knowledge fossilizes easily. A simple flake can therefore sit beside a highly complex way of life. The tool may be ordinary, while the decisions surrounding it are extraordinary. Which animals should be followed? When will blue sheep move? Where can hides be dried? How should meat be stored? Which part of the cave remains safest during winter? These questions leave only indirect traces, but every butchered bone proves that somebody answered them successfully. The cave also reminds us that absence is often created by preservation. If Baishia had been warmer, wetter, or more disturbed, its proteins and sediment DNA might have vanished. Denisovans would still have lived there, but modern science might never know. Human history would remain wrong because chemistry erased the correction. That possibility applies across Asia. Vast regions have produced stone tools without identifiable human remains. Others preserve skulls, but no molecules. Some contain fossils removed from their original layers decades ago. The Denisovan map is therefore not their real range. It is the small surviving pattern created by geology, excavation, and scientific opportunity. Every new method changes that pattern. Proteomics can identify fossils too old for DNA. Sediment analysis can find populations without bones. Enamel can preserve information where ordinary collagen fails. Together, these techniques are turning Asia's unidentified Middle Pleistocene fossils into testable evidence. The next answer may already be sitting in a museum drawer labeled only as archaic human. That possibility gives the monk's discovery a second meaning. He did not uncover a finished answer. He rescued one fragment that allowed other evidence to become visible. Once the jaw was recognized as Denisovan, sediments, animal bones, old museum fossils, and unexplained skulls could be asked new questions. Science often advances this way. One object changes the category into which later objects can fit. Before Ziahi, a robust Asian jaw could remain an uncertain archaic specimen. After Ziahi, proteins could test whether it belonged to a population already known genetically, but barely known anatomically. The mountain therefore changed more than one timeline. It changed what researchers were prepared to recognize. That may be the most important discovery beneath Baishia. Denisovans had not been absent from Asian prehistory. They had been present without a name, scattered through fossils, genomes, and living adaptations that science had not yet connected. The cave did not create the missing people. It finally made them visible. And once visible, they directly transformed the story of who reached Asia's hardest environments first, how long they remained, and what modern humanity inherited.